Welcome back to COMM 1113. Today we're going to start off the semester with Chapter 1. As you're reading Chapter 1, there are a couple things that I want you to think about and pay attention to. The first is that communication is not as easy as we want to think that it is. Remember that communicating doesn't occur just when we tell somebody something. My mom said to me many times growing up, "Clean your room." But did she communicate? Did I hear her? Did her message land in the way that she wanted to? Did I receive it? These are questions that we need to ask when we're thinking about the messages that we send. So as you read through Chapter 1, think about what communication is. Are you a good communicator? Now we'll think more about that when we get to Chapter 2, but now is the time to start thinking about it. As we know, communication is difficult. And Osmo in Chapter 1, he's a little bit of a downer. But I don't want you to get so distraught when you're thinking about communication that you think that you can't do it. I promise you can. You can do this. You can communicate. As you read Chapter 2, there are a couple things that I want you to pay important attention to. The first is that it's so important that we learn how to communicate with ourselves before we can communicate with the outside world. It starts with self-awareness, and that's what Chapter 2 focuses on in its entirety. You'll be talking about yourself, self-concept, self-image, self-esteem, self-concept clarity, and the chapter will provide you clear definitions for all of these. You'll want to read analytically so that you can make sure you're able to discuss these in your discussion board for Module 1. One other thing that I want you to pay attention to is that I'm asking you to look at other people and examine their self-awareness. So I've provided you a video of Corinne and Taylor having a heated conversation from The Bachelor, and I'm asking you to put them on Maslow's framework and discuss their self-awareness in your journal for this module. I've also provided you a self-awareness quiz. This quiz is completely optional. You do not have to turn it into me. I won't be grading it. But if you really want to sit down and examine your own self-awareness, this is a great place to start. I'd encourage that you take it even before you read the chapter. And then finally, I've provided you an article about media usage and how that can affect our mental health. Remember, we do so much communicating through our phones and through social media. What impact does that have? How does that help define or not define who we are or who we see ourselves are? I look forward to hearing about your thoughts on this chapter in your discussion board and in your journal. Your textbook theorizes that what you say is who you are. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that statement, it can be perceived by others that the things you say define who you are. I told you guys at the beginning of the semester that I'm from the South, and there are a lot of different things that we say in the South that might leave an impression on those that we come into contact with. "Hey, y'all, how you doing?" "Oh, he's over there yonder. We're all hunkered down. He's up in the holler." Who do you think I am? Now, that's not exactly who I am in my core, but it certainly gives an impression to the outside world of who I might be, simply because of the words that I choose to use, because they are part of my upbringing, which we'll talk more about later in this book. But before I get too far ahead of myself, there's an exercise that I like to do in Chapter 3 that I want to encourage you to take some time to do once you finish reading the chapter. Again, it's so important that we communicate well with ourselves, that we have supportive communication with ourselves before we can have supportive communication with the outside world. So I'd like you to take some time, maybe 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, set the timer on your phone, and write down some of the harshest things that you say about yourself or that somebody else has said about you. I've done this before, and the things that I've written down are ugly, untalented, and weak. Now, these are things that were originally said by somebody else about me, but I took them on and I put them in here and I started to say them about myself. But after several years, I realized that isn't healthy, and it was seriously impacting how I talked to people around me. So I took some time, again, another 30, 60, 90 seconds, to sit down and fix that. That's destructive communication, and I'm destroying myself. So how can I make that supportive? Well, I could have simply crossed out the word ugly and written pretty, or I could have crossed out the word untalented and written worthwhile, or I could have crossed out weak and written strong. But I chose to do something a little bit different. I wrote, Katie is enough, because no matter what I say about myself or to myself or somebody else says about me, I can remind myself that I'm enough and that it sort of encompasses anything negative that could be said. So that's what I do. And I would encourage you to do that before we move on to chapter 4 in nonverbal communication. What is nonverbal communication? Well, as your textbook says in chapter 4, it's basically any form of communication that occurs other than with our words, or verbal communication, like we learned about in chapter 3. It can be the sound of our voice, the way our tone hits, the rate at which we speak, the volume at which we speak. It can be what our eyes say, how we gesture. Are we smiling? Are we not? How close are we to each other? What does our space look like? What do we wear? But you'll learn all of this as you read through the chapter. One thing I want you to pay attention to as you read through this chapter is that your textbook says nonverbal communication makes up 93% of our emotional meaning, whereas our verbal channels only make up 7%. Can you believe that? 93% of what you say, it's right here. It's not the words that you say. Now in chapter 3, we learned about the importance of words, but in chapter 4, you're going to learn about the importance of nonverbal communication. Again, there are a couple of videos in this chapter that I want you to watch and respond to in your journal as you go through your chapter reading. You'll watch a video from an Emma Stone movie. You'll watch a video from The Devil Wears Prada. And then finally, you'll watch a video of a 911 call recording and a news report. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on chapter 4 in your discussion board and in your journal.